Amidst the chaos of war, a church stood silent, transformed into an unlikely sanctuary for the wounded. In Marseille, 1940, the air carried a heavy stillness, punctuated only by the distant echoes of sirens and the muffled cries of those seeking refuge. Within the dimly lit interior of the church, the smell of disinfectant mingled with the faintest hint of incense, creating an unsettling blend. Rows of wooden pews, once a place for prayer, had become makeshift beds for the injured, each space marked by the quiet desperation of a life interrupted. Nurses moved with a sense of urgency, their hands steady yet trembling. They exchanged glances filled with unspoken understanding, each one aware of the gravity of the moment, of lives hanging in the balance. One nurse, her face pale yet resolute, paused to catch her breath. The weight of the world seemed to press down upon her chest, each inhalation a struggle against the oppressive air. She glanced around, her eyes falling on a young soldier lying on a pew, his face gaunt and ashen, the evidence of trauma etched into his features. "Hold on," she whispered, though the words felt like a prayer more than a promise. As she leaned closer, her fingers brushed against his clammy forehead. The boy's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, confusion mingling with fear. She felt a rush of warmth in her chest, but quickly pulled back, forcing herself to remain professional. In a makeshift corner of the church, a table covered in sterile cloths stood ready for the unexpected. A light flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced across the tiled floor. The nurse could see the outline of an X-ray machine, its cold metal frame a stark contrast to the warmth of the flickering candles nearby. It was surreal, this blending of faith and science, and yet it felt like the only option available in a city besieged by uncertainty. With a soft sigh, she turned her attention back to the soldier. His breathing was shallow, each gasp a mix of pain and fear, and she felt a pang of helplessness clutch at her heart. "We need to get him to the X-ray," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She motioned to her colleague, who approached with determination, yet there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. Together they moved him gently, careful not to jostle his injured body. The process was slow, an agonizing shuffle across the church's cool floor. The soldier cried out, a sound that echoed through the cavernous space, a sound that made the nurse's heart race with dread. She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his grip, the strength draining away like the waning light of day. As they reached the X-ray machine, the nurse's hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade she struggled to maintain. She positioned him carefully, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy shroud. The machine hummed softly, a mechanical lullaby that felt at odds with the urgency of their situation. She stepped back, allowing her colleague to take over, her own mind racing with uncertainty. "Will he be okay?" the nurse asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The other nurse glanced back, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. "We have to know what we're dealing with, just breathe," she replied, but the reassurance felt hollow against the backdrop of the church, the prayers hanging in the air like a fragile veil. In that moment, time became elastic, stretching and contracting in a heartbeat. The sound of the X-ray machine filled the silence, a mechanical whir that seemed to pause the world outside. The rustle of fabric, the shuffling of feet, the distant echoes of other wounded souls, they all faded into a background hum, leaving only the two nurses and the boy before them. As the image developed, the anticipation hung thick in the air. Each second felt like an eternity, the tension palpable, a silent plea for clarity amid chaos. The nurse's eyes fixed on the developing image, her heart racing as she sought answers in the shadows and light. What would they find? How much pain lay wrapped in the secrets of his body? Finally, the image emerged, stark and revealing. The nurse's breath hitched in her throat as she took in the sight. A fractured bone, a wound that would require immediate attention. Her colleague's face contorted in concern, the weight of responsibility weighing heavily upon them both. "We need to get the surgeon," she said, urgency creeping into her voice. As they assisted the soldier from the machine, their hands moved in practiced harmony, guided by instinct and training. Each movement resonated with an unspoken promise to save him, to help him find his way back from the brink. Their breaths synchronized, both women feeling the pressure of time slipping through their fingers like sand. Outside, the The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the city, echoing the turmoil within the church. A storm was brewing, both in the sky and in their hearts. The nurse stepped back for a moment, her hands trembling as she fought against the swell of anxiety. The silence enveloped her, a blanket over the chaos, and for a heartbeat, she found herself lost in the weight of the moment. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and the faint hint of lavender from the altar candles. In that instant, she felt the collective breath of the church, the silent prayers of hope, intermingling with the cries of suffering. It was a reminder that despite the darkness there was light, even if just a flicker. The soldier looked up, his eyes meeting hers, a fleeting connection that crossed the chasm of fear and uncertainty. There was vulnerability in that gaze, and yet there was something more, an unyielding spirit, a will to survive. The nurse felt a rush of determination surge within her, a promise that she would not let him fall into the abyss. As the machinery hummed in the background, as the storm outside began to break, the transformation was palpable. The church, once a sanctuary of faith, had morphed into a battleground of another kind, a space where lives were saved and hope was kindled, even amidst the encroaching darkness of war. And in that moment, a shared resolve filled the air, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when faced with the unimaginable. Amidst the low hum of murmured prayers and the occasional rustle of bandages, the church enveloped the nurses in an uncomfortable embrace. Outside, the streets of Marseille were eerily empty, life suspended under the shadow of war. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, steeped in desperation and determination. A nurse, her forehead slick with sweat, glanced toward the entrance, her heart racing. The distant rumble of aircraft overhead sent a shiver through her, a feeling that had become all too familiar, tightening her throat and stealing her breath. She shook her head, willing the fear away. The soldier needed her now. His eyes were still closed, but the flicker of consciousness was tangible, a fragile thread that connected them in this moment. She could almost hear his heartbeat, a silent rhythm that matched her own racing pulse. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic, a stark reminder of the reality they faced. Each breath felt like a weight pressing down upon her, while the flickering candlelight danced like ghosts across the walls. As she prepared, her hands trembled ever so slightly, betraying the calm facade she fought to maintain. The nurse took a deep breath, inhaling the mix of sterilization and incense, a jarring combination that mirrored the chaos in her mind. She looked down at her hands, steady now as she prepped the X-ray machine, a mechanical beast that felt alien in this sacred space. The machine stood like a sentinel, cold and clinical, waiting to unveil the hidden wounds of war. "Just a moment," she murmured to the soldier, her voice low and soothing, though doubt gnawed at her thoughts. Would this help? Would they find what they needed? Outside, the sirens wailed again, and she could feel the walls shudder, as if the very structure of the church was holding its breath in fear. The soldier stirred, a faint groan escaping his lips. The nurse's heart leaped. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. His eyes fluttered open slowly, revealing a mixture of confusion and pain. "Where?" he began, his voice barely a whisper, but she understood the question. Where was he? What had happened? "Shh, you're safe. You're in a church," she reassured him, her hand brushing against his forehead again, her fingers trembling against his skin. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, a reminder that life still pulsed beneath the surface. "We're going to help you, just hold on." The soldier's gaze flickered to the shadows flickering around them, and she followed his line of sight. There was a stillness in the air, a collective breath held tight as if the entire world awaited something. Her eyes caught the gaze of another nurse across the aisle, their expressions mirroring each other's silent fear and determination. The other nurse, her hands a blur as she bandaged a wounded man, seemed to exist in a different realm. Time felt suspended in this church, moments stretching into eternity. The muffled sounds of the outside world faded, leaving only the soft rustling of fabric and the faint echoes of whispered prayers. Each passing second felt like a lifetime, the weight of uncertainty heavy in the air. "Can you move your legs?" the nurse asked, her voice steady despite the storm swirling in her mind. The soldier blinked, processing her words, hesitation flickering across his features. She could see the struggle within him. the desire to comply battling with the pain that lay just beneath the surface. He hesitated, his breath hitching ever so slightly, a momentary pause that felt like an eternity. With an effort that drained him, he shifted his legs, a soft groan escaping his lips. The nurse's heart raced, a mix of relief and dread flooding her senses. This was a sign, she thought. They could still save him. She glanced back at the X-ray machine, its ominous presence looming large. Would the images it produced reveal the truth of his injuries? The church, once a place for worship, now felt like an arena of survival. Each nurse bore the weight of countless lives, their hands steady yet burdened with the knowledge of what lay ahead. She felt the palms of her hands dampen, the scent of fear mingling with the antiseptic. Her mind raced, envisioning the soldiers' injuries, each possibility pulling her deeper into the abyss of anxiety. "Hold on, we're almost there," she whispered again, her voice a lifeline amidst the chaos. The soldier's eyes searched hers, a flicker of trust igniting in the depths of his pain. She only wished she could promise him safety, but in this moment there were no guarantees. As she prepared for the X-ray, the tension in the air thickened. Outside, the low rumble of engines drew closer, the vibrations shaking the very foundations of their sanctuary. The nurse's heart drummed in her chest, each thud echoing the urgency of their situation. The flickering light overhead cast long shadows, and she felt the weight of countless gazes upon her, the silent prayers of those seeking refuge in this makeshift hospital. "Just a little longer," she said, more to herself than the soldier. She positioned him carefully, her hands moving with practiced precision, though her thoughts were a whirlwind of worry. His gaze remained fixed on her, an anchor in a storm. She could see the flicker of his hope, fragile yet unwavering, mirrored in the depths of her own heart. Time seemed both an enemy and ally, each tick of the clock a reminder of the urgency pressing down upon them. The X-ray machine hummed to life, the sound resonating like thunder in the stillness. She could feel the tension in the room tighten, the collective breath of the nurses and wounded held in a delicate balance. As the machine whirred, she caught a glimpse of the soldier's face, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze, the air thick with unspoken words, the silence pregnant with possibility. Their eyes locked, and she felt a connection that transcended the chaos surrounding them. Then, in a heartbeat, the world outside erupted. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the church, the walls reverberating with the force of the chaos. The soldier's eyes widened, breath catching in his throat. The nurse's heart raced, the reality of their situation crashing down upon her like a wave. She could feel the trembling in her hands return, but she forced herself to remain steady, her mind laser-focused on the task at hand. In that cacophony of sound, the church remained a fragile bastion of hope, a sanctuary where science and faith intertwined, battling against the encroaching darkness. And as the X-ray images began to develop, she held onto the flicker of hope that whispered through the silence, that perhaps, just perhaps, they could still save him. The room was dim, the faint glow of candles flickering against the stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The distant sound of sirens continued to pierce the stillness, echoing the chaos just outside the church doors. The nurse's heart raced, and she felt the familiar pressure building in her chest, a heavy weight that threatened to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes briefly, focusing on the rhythm of her breath, a calming mantra amidst the tumult. The soldiers' breaths were shallow, each inhale a fragile whisper. She had seen fear before, but the look in his eyes was something else entirely, an emptiness that echoed the destruction outside. His uniform, once crisp, was now stained and rumpled, each mark a story of pain and survival. She gently placed her hand on his forehead again, searching for signs of awareness. For a moment he seemed to respond, his eyelids fluttering as if he were trying to break free from a dream. Around her, the air felt charged with uncertainty. Other nurses moved in quiet haste, their hands working quickly yet methodically, each task a repetition of the last. The sound of bandages being torn, the rustle of cloth, the muted conversations, all of it swirled together in a tapestry of urgency. The nurse found herself drawn to the rhythmic motion, an automatic response to the chaos, a way to find solace in the storm. She could hear the muffled cries of patients in the distance, the echoes of their fears drifting through the church like haunting memories. It was a sound that lingered in her mind, each cry a reminder of the fragility of life. As she prepared the X-ray machine, her hands moved with purpose, but her mind wrestled with doubt. Would they have enough time? The thought gnawed at her, relentless and consuming. With a soft click, the machine came to life. The whirring sound a stark reminder of the blend of faith and technology in this sacred space. She turned to the soldier again, her gaze steadying him. "We're going to help you," she assured him, though her voice trembled with the weight of uncertainty. "Just hold on." The soldier's eyes darted around the room, fear mingling with flickers of confusion. She could see the way his hands clenched into fists, the tremors betraying the resolve he was trying to muster. She wondered how many battles he had faced on the front lines, how many moments of sheer terror had brought him to this silent sanctuary. As she carefully positioned him for the X-ray, she felt a strange sense of connection, an intimacy born from shared vulnerability. The church, with its wooden pews and flickering candles, had become a refuge, a place where lives could be touched, if only for a fleeting moment. The soldiers they treated here were not just nameless, faceless victims. They were stories waiting to be told, lives waiting to be saved. The machine hummed softly as she adjusted its position, her movements deliberate and slow. All around her, the world seemed both distant and near, as if time itself had paused. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, her palms slick with sweat, a sensation she struggled to shake off. With every passing second, the weight of expectation grew heavier, the silence amplifying the tension in the air. As the X-ray began, she held her breath, the noise of the outside world fading into a muted background. She focused solely on the soldier, on his breathing, on the way his chest rose and fell, the rhythm of fragile lifeline. She couldn't help but notice the small details, the way his eyelashes rested gently against his pale cheeks, the faint scar above his left brow that told of past struggles. In that moment, she felt as if she were witnessing not just a patient, but a life defined by resilience and suffering. The image developed slowly, revealing the inner workings of his body, a stark contrast to the chaos of the outside world. But as she looked at the dark shapes taking form on the screen, her heart sank. There were signs of damage, wounds that ran deeper than just flesh. A sharp inhale escaped her as she turned back to him, her mind racing to formulate a plan, a way to bridge the gap between hope and despair. The other nurses moved seamlessly around the room, their actions a dance of efficiency, but she felt a sense of isolation creeping in. It was as if time had split, leaving her suspended in a moment of unbearable tension. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking away, each second a reminder of the urgency they faced. How long had they already been here? 20 minutes. 30. Each tick resounded like a countdown, amplifying the weight of the decisions they had to make. Then the silence shattered. A loud crash echoed from outside the church, a reminder of the war that loomed just beyond the sanctuary. The soldier jerked at the sound, his eyes wide with terror. The nurse quickly placed a calm hand on his shoulder, locking her gaze with his. "Stay with me," she urged, her voice steady, yet soft. The connection between them felt electric, a tether in the storm. In that moment, she realized that this wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for hope. The air around them thickened with unspoken words, and she could feel the weight of his fear pressing down upon her. She took a deep breath, willing herself to be the anchor he needed, to provide a sliver of reassurance amidst the chaos. As she prepared to take the X-ray image to the medical team, she felt a flood of emotions swell within her. The weight of their shared struggle hung in the air, a silent agreement forged in the face of adversity. She knew they were fighting together, each breath a testament to their resilience. With the image in hand, she stepped away from the soldier, her heart heavy yet hopeful. The connection remained, a thread that bound them in this moment, amidst the flickering candles and the echoes of prayer. She walked slowly, her eyes flicking back to him, to the vulnerability that had been laid bare. The silence of the church wrapped around her, a constant reminder of the fragile line they all walked, the line between life and death, fear and hope. In that sacred space, amidst the chaos of war, the human spirit shone through unyielding in the face of despair. She took one last glance at the soldier, his gaze steady on her, and with that, she understood. This church, once a place of worship, had become a sanctuary for the soul, a haven where the battle for hope continued, even amidst the darkest of nights. The soldier's eyes fluttered open slowly, revealing a deep well of confusion mixed with pain. The nurse leaned in closer, almost instinctively, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm to provide comfort. The warmth of his skin felt fragile against the chill of the church's stone floor. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and she could see the flicker of awareness wash over him. It sent a surge of hope through her, battling her own rising anxiety. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice soft yet steady, a lifeline in the murky waters of uncertainty. Outside, the world was chaos, but in this moment it was just the two of them, a shared heartbeat tethering them together amidst the storm. He blinked at her, a slight furrow forming between his brows as he attempted to grasp the reality around him. She felt her breath hitch. For a heartbeat, time froze. The candlelight flickered wildly, casting shadows that danced on the walls, and for a moment, the church felt alive, wrapping them in its protective embrace. "Can you hear me?" she asked gently, her fingers brushing the back of his hand, steadying herself as much as him. He nodded slightly, a barely perceptible movement, yet it ignited a flicker of determination within her. The air was thick with tension, an invisible weight pressing down. Outside the church, the sirens wailed again, a haunting sound that seemed to scrape against her nerves. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to concentrate on the task at hand. The X-ray machine loomed beside her like a beast waiting to be tamed, its cold metal surface gleaming ominously. "Let's find out what's going on inside," she said, though her heart raced with uncertainty. She turned, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the machine, each click of the dials echoing in the silence. He winced, a sharp intake of breath that made her heart drop. I'm here," he stammered, words breaking through the fog of his mind. There was a desperation in his voice, a plea for assurance amidst the chaos. "Just a moment longer," she reassured him, forcing her fingers to steady. The scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, sharper now, mingling with the lingering incense. She fought against the rising tide of anxiety, aware of the weight of expectation, not just from the soldier in front of her, but from the unspoken pressure surrounding them. She slowly maneuvered the machine into place, acutely aware of the minutes ticking away like a ticking clock, each second stretching into an eternity. Her breaths felt shallow, almost caught in her throat as she focused on the task. The soldier's gaze remained fixed on her, an unwavering anchor that steadied her as she fought against the growing tension. A moment passed, then another. In the stillness, the distant rumble of aircraft faded into the background, replaced by the soft sounds of her own breathing and the faint rustle of fabric as she adjusted the soldier's position. She could feel sweat trickling down her back, pooling under the fabric of her uniform, a reminder of the heat building between them, charged with the unspoken fear hanging in the air. "Can you lift your arm for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if raising it too loud might shatter the fragile silence. The soldier's brow furrowed deeper, but he nodded, slowly raising his arm, each movement deliberate and heavy with effort. "Good," she said, her heart pounding as she positioned the machine. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the lives potentially hinging on their next steps. Just a little more. The soldier's face twisted in pain, a slight groan escaping his lips. She fought the urge to wince, to pull back. Instead, she leaned in closer, her breath mingling with the incense, offering her silent strength. His pain was palpable, a raw thread connecting them, reminding her that this was not just another day in a war. This was a life hanging in the balance, teetering on the edge of the unknown. "Deep breaths just like we practiced," she encouraged, though the words felt hollow, almost desperate. She could see his eyes flaring with a determination that mirrored her own, a flicker of resolve amidst the pain. The air was thick with tension, stretching to a breaking point. As she pressed the button to capture the image, time seemed to slow. The machine hummed to life, a mechanical heartbeat that resonated in the silence. She held her breath, the world around her fading momentarily. It felt as if the very walls exhaled, a collective sigh echoing through the church, a shared moment of anticipation. The image developed slowly, the tension thickening in the air. She felt the soldier's gaze on her, an unspoken question hanging between them. "What is it?" he whispered, the tremor in his voice breaking through her concentration. "Just a moment," she urged, though her own heart raced. She could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her, the fear that they might not find what they needed. The image finally emerged, stark against the light, revealing the hidden secrets beneath the surface. The soldier's breath caught in his throat, and she could see the realization wash over him, a mix of dread and resignation that mirrored her own. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm, even as her own heart sank. "I won't let you down," she promised, the words tumbling from her lips. As she studied the image, a sense of determination ignited within her, igniting a fierce drive to do everything in her power to help him. Outside, the sirens wailed again, a chilling reminder of the world beyond these walls. Yet in this small sanctuary, amidst the flickering shadows and the scent of antiseptic, they were bound together, two souls fighting against the tide of despair. As she prepared for the next steps, her hands trembled less, steadied by the knowledge that they were not alone in this battle. The weight of the moment began to shift, each heartbeat echoing the silent promise that she would do everything to ensure he emerged from this darkness. "Let's get you through this," she whispered, the determination in her voice cutting through the heavy silence, a beacon of hope illuminating the shadows of fear that surrounded them. The soldier's breath quickened, and she felt the urgency of the moment tighten around them like a vice. She could see a flicker of recognition in his eyes as he stared up at her, a mix of fear and hope swirling within him. This was a church, a place meant for solace and prayer, yet it had become a makeshift X-ray room filled with the smell of antiseptic and the weight of desperation. The faint scent of candle wax clung to the air, creating an odd juxtaposition of the sacred and the clinical. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the machine, the metal cool against her fingertips. This wasn't how she had envisioned her role as a nurse. She had imagined healing in a place of peace, not amidst the cacophony of war. Outside, the world was ablaze, but here, in this dimly lit sanctuary, every second felt suspended in time. She could hear the distant rumble of artillery, the thud of distant explosions. Yet in this space they were muffled, muted by the thick stone walls that had once sheltered prayers. As the machine whirred to life, she adjusted the settings with meticulous care, her mind racing with the weight of the task at hand. She had trained for this, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of war. Her heart pounded, and she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Her breath hitched again as she felt the soldier's gaze bore into her, an unspoken connection forming between them in that fleeting moment. "Please, just do it," he whispered, his voice barely above a broken murmur. The tremor in his words sent a chill down her spine, a reminder of their shared vulnerability in this moment. She nodded slowly, her throat dry as she fought to maintain her composure. "Hold on," she whispered back, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was comforting, him or herself. Behind her, the other nurses moved with purpose, their faces masks of concentration. The rhythmic sound of bandages being ripped echoed around them, a steady reminder of the task that lay ahead. She positioned the soldier's body carefully, her hands brushing against his skin, feeling the warmth beneath the chill of sweat. He winced slightly. The pain etched into his features and her heart raced in response. They were so close to each other in this moment, two souls caught in the storm of a war that loomed outside the church's heavy doors. As she pressed the button to begin the X-ray, the room seemed to hold its breath. The soft hum of the machine filled the silence, wrapping around them like a protective shroud. She watched as the light streamed from the device, illuminating the soldier's face, casting sharp shadows that highlighted the lines of fear and pain etched upon it. For a second, she lost herself in his gaze, the vulnerability mirrored in his eyes, and she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Time stretched in those seconds, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. Outside, the sounds of violence felt like a distant storm, while inside, the air thickened with unspoken fears and hopes. In that small corner of Marseille, their world had narrowed down to the two of them, a silent agreement forged in the face of chaos. The whirring of the machine faded into a low hum, and she leaned closer, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the device. "Just a little longer," she murmured, though the words felt inadequate against the enormity of their situation. She could feel the soldiers' breaths becoming shallower, each exhale a struggle against the tide of pain that threatened to pull him under. With each passing second, the tension in the room grew, wrapping around them like a tightening noose. The flicker of candlelight danced in the corners, casting playful shadows that belied the seriousness of their task. The other nurses continued their silent work, their movements synchronized in an unspoken rhythm, a mechanical dance born of necessity. As the X-ray completed, she released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The soldier's eyes remained fixed on her, his trust palpable and heavy in the air. She reached out to him again, brushing a few strands of sweat-soaked hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The warmth of his skin contrasted starkly with the chill of uncertainty that draped over them. "Now, we'll get you taken care of," she promised, her voice steadier than she felt. But inside, the uncertainty gnawed at her with relentless persistence. Would they have enough time to process the images? Would they be able to save him in the face of everything that was happening outside? Each question echoed in her mind. Another weight added to her already burdened heart. The air shifted as the images developed, the soft clicking and whirring of the machine filling the silence. She watched the soldier's expression change, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes, quickly followed by a shadow of fear. For a moment, the world outside faded away, and all that remained was the bond that had formed between them in the shared silence of the church. "Please, don't let me die here," he whispered, and her heart shattered a little bit more. She felt the weight of his words deep within her, a reminder of the fragile thread that connected life and death. She had never felt so helpless, so aware of the fragility of existence. "Hang on," she repeated, the mantra now a lifeline. She could hear the distant sounds of ambulances arriving, the shouts of soldiers and medics preparing for the next wave of casualties. But here, in this small sanctuary, they were suspended in a moment that felt both infinite and fleeting. As she worked to process the images, her hands moved automatically, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. She could hear the muffled cries of others outside, the sharpness of pain cutting through the air around them. The silence within the church felt both sacred and suffocating, a cocoon that held their shared reality, their fears and their hopes. The images finally revealed themselves, and she studied them with a keen eye. Each detail spoke volumes of the soldier's condition, a silent narrative unfolding in the stark contrasts of light and shadow. She could feel her heart race as she assessed the damage, and she knew deep down that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. A breath caught in her throat as she turned back to him, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. She had to find the right words, but all that came out was, "You're not alone." It was a simple truth, yet in this moment, it felt like a promise imbued with hope. As the sounds of chaos continued to swirl outside, within this church, against all odds, they clung to each other's humanity in the storm of war. The nurse's hands shook as she positioned the soldier beneath the X-ray machine, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on her chest. She could see the lines etched on his face, traces of fear mixed with a flicker of hope. The church, once a sanctuary of peace, transformed into a makeshift hospital, reverberated with the distant echoes of sirens and the murmurs of fellow patients. Her heart pounded, each beat a reminder of the fragility of life that surrounded them. "Just breathe," she murmured, her voice a gentle caress in the oppressive silence. The soldier's breaths came in shallow gasps, each exhale a battle against the pain that radiated from his wounds. She could see the sweat glistening on his brow, a testament to his struggle. The dim light from the flickering candles cast an ethereal glow, illuminating the determination in her eyes as she prepared for the X-ray. With each adjustment she made, the machine loomed larger, its metallic presence overwhelming in the confined space of the church. The air was thick with apprehension, and she could feel her own heart racing in rhythm with his. "Are you ready?" she asked, meeting his gaze, searching for any sign of reassurance. He nodded again, more firmly this time, a spark of resilience igniting within the depths of his weary soul. As she pressed the buttons, a soft whirring filled the air, a sound that felt both foreign and intimate. She watched him closely, noting how his jaw tightened with the effort of holding still. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across the walls, creating a surreal dance that mirrored the turmoil inside her mind. Outside, the chaos continued unabated, but in this moment, in this sacred space, they existed in a fragile bubble of time. "Remember, you're safe here," she whispered, even though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. The truth hung heavily in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of their reality. With each passing second, the weight of the world seemed to press down harder. The sirens outside a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the walls. The X-ray machine emitted a low hum, and for a moment, everything fell silent, except for the rhythmic sound of their breaths. She could see the flicker of fear in his eyes, and in that instant, her own heart ached for him. What horrors had he witnessed? What memories were etched into the lines of his face? She felt her breath hitch, the enormity of the situation sweeping over her like a tidal wave. The moment stretched on, filled with unspoken words and shared fears. She could sense the tension building between them, a silent pact forged in the crucible of uncertainty. "Stay with me," she urged softly, her fingers brushing against his sweaty forehead, a small gesture of comfort in the midst of chaos. He swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering, and she could almost hear the thoughts racing through his mind. Nothing about this felt normal. The church, with its solemn archways and flickering candlelight, was not meant to bear witness to such suffering. Yet here they were, bound together by the circumstances they could not control, the fragile threads of humanity intertwined, creating a tapestry of shared experience that transcended the horrors outside. As the X-ray process continued, she felt a flicker of hope in the pit of her stomach. Perhaps they could find answers. Perhaps this moment of stillness could lead to something greater. But with hope came the weight of fear, a gnawing uncertainty that crept into her thoughts. What if the X-ray revealed something they could not face? What if the outcome was one they had both dreaded, but were too afraid to voice? The machine's whirring slowed, the tension palpable. He shifted slightly beneath the contraption, and she felt her heart leap in response. "I'm right here," she reassured him, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment they had created. Outside, the world continued to spin in chaos, but within these four stone walls, a different battle raged. A battle against despair, against the overwhelming tide of uncertainty that threatened to consume them both. The candle flames danced nervously, mirroring the flickers of hope and fear that intertwined in the air like smoke. As the last click echoed, she leaned closer, her eyes searching his for signs of courage. "We'll get through this, together." Her words hung in the air, a fragile promise suspended in time. The soldier met her gaze, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, replaced by a shared understanding that transcended their individual struggles. But then, without warning, the stillness shattered. A distant explosion rumbled through the ground, shaking the very foundations of the church. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the candles flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows that danced across their faces. His eyes widened in fear, and her heart raced in sympathy. "Stay still," she urged, her voice rising above the chaos. The air grew heavy with despair as she tried to maintain control amid the swirling uncertainty. The world outside was closing in, and she could almost feel the suffocating grip of panic tightening around them. But even amidst the destruction, she leaned closer, whispering reassurances that felt almost futile. "You're safe here," she repeated, the words a soothing balm in the face of turmoil. She watched as he fought against the instinct to flee, the deep-rooted fear that urged him to escape the confines of the church. With each passing moment, the distance between them shrank. The soldier's grip on reality began to falter, his breaths quickening as the echoes of chaos seeped into his consciousness. She held his gaze, her own breath caught in her throat, feeling the weight of his fear crashing down upon her like a tidal wave. Then, an eerie silence enveloped them. The chaos outside faded into the background, leaving only the sound of their breaths echoing in the dimly lit room. The soldier's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and she felt a pang of empathy. It was an understanding of the human experience, the way fear could paralyze even the strongest resolve. "Look at me," she commanded softly, her voice steady, willing herself to remain strong. "We will get through this together." Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment she saw a flicker of recognition. The collective struggle they faced transcended the external chaos, binding them in an unbreakable bond. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he nodded, allowing hope to triumph over fear. In that sacred space, amid the turmoil of war, two souls intertwined in an unspoken promise, one of resilience, of shared humanity, and the determination to face the unknown together.